Welcome to another Conversations with Marty Ross MD, brought to you here from the People's Republic of Seattle, where all of us in the blue zone areas are a little bit in shock after the outcome of last night's election. It's pretty amazing, as I've been hearing my patients describe this here in the office today too. So anyhow, with that as a backdrop, the craziness of the last 24 hours, I'm glad to be here with you tonight so we can learn something about Lyme disease, and hopefully I can help you find ways to improve your Lyme disease treatment as well too. For those of you that are new to these webinars, you create them with your questions, and so I'm glad to see you here. The way that you can go ahead and write a question to me is there's a chat box over on the right-hand side, right down there at the bottom. There's a chat box, and write your question to me. Now be aware, there's a lot of people showing up at these webinars, so I will not get through everybody's questions. I had somebody that wrote me very upset last week that I didn't get to their question. Well, it's kind of impossible. There's a lot of questions, but I'll get through as many as I possibly can. The one thing that I'll ask as you're writing your question, please be careful to only hit the enter key one time. The reason for that is each time you hit enter, it actually creates a separate questions on my end, which makes it a little bit difficult, okay? I am recording the webinar tonight, and tomorrow morning you'll receive an email from me saying that the recording is available for you to view. If you happen to not get that email for some reason, just be aware that there is a recordings page, and the way that you find that is you go to the website www.treatlyme.net, which is the Treat Lyme book. There's a tab at the top that says webinars. Click on that, and from that page then you can click on a link to the webinars recording page. Okay, so go to the webinars page, then click on the webinars recording link, and you'll be able to see the recording of tonight's webinar. So if you happen to miss something, just realize it is going to be recorded for you. During the course of the webinar tonight, I will show you various articles that you might want to refer back to again later from the Treat Lyme book. As many of you know, most of the things that I talk about here in these webinars I actually have written about in the Treat Lyme book. And I'm happy to report I'm actually in the middle of writing an article about pulse dosing of antibiotics for Lyme, which I have described here a number of times, but we'll talk about. If I get asked a question tonight, I'll talk about it. But within the next day or two, you should see a new article coming up on pulsed antibiotics. And eventually, I'm going to be probably writing another article about something called persister Lyme, which I get into a little bit in the pulsed antibiotics, but you'll see when that article comes live in the next day or two. When it does come live in the next day or two, I will put a post on my Facebook page so that you're aware that this new article is available, especially for those of you that are subscribers. And if you happen to subscribe to the Treat Lyme book, I will go ahead and send out an email about that as well too. All right. So during the webinar tonight, if you are a live attendee, you'll get to see the questions that you've written posted on your screen. If you happen to be listening to a recorded version of this webinar, you will not be able to see it. They don't show up, okay? So I will be reading the questions as well. The webinar is scheduled for an hour and a half tonight. Sometimes I make it the whole hour and a half. Sometimes I poop out. I think tonight I have it in me for an hour and a half, but keep in mind that I do these webinars at the end of my long day already after I've seen a whole load of people that need help. And so sometimes I'm not able to go the whole hour and a half, but I think I will be able to tonight. So with all that as background, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and take the first question here. And this is from Brenda. Hi, Brenda. Let's see. I sincerely appreciate all you do for us. You're welcome. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Do you have a different protocol for patients with neuro-Lyme? Is neuro-Lyme harder to treat? So when people use neuro-Lyme, they usually mean it's affecting their thinking, okay? But neuro-Lyme can also mean that, or affecting their thinking or affecting the brain, all right? So it can affect your cognition, the ability for you to think. Another way that it can affect the brain is that sometimes it can give Alzheimer's disease, and some of us think that a major cause of Alzheimer's disease is Lyme. Lyme in the brain can give multiple sclerosis sometimes. Sometimes Lyme in the brain can give Parkinson's disease. Sometimes Lyme in the brain can give seizures, okay? So that's also neuro-Lyme too. But neuro-Lyme can also mean the neuropathies that people get with Lyme, and that by neuropathies, I mean numbness or nerve pain. Nerve pain can have qualities of sharp, stabbing, shooting, piercing, burning, or electrical, and that would all be called neuro-Lyme. Numbness can sometimes mean injury to the brain, giving you numbness out here, but usually in Lyme, numbness out here in your arms or in your legs is usually a result of the nerves outside of the brain being injured. But I call that neuro-Lyme as well too, okay? So if we look at studies about Lyme, usually I think it's I may be remembering this slightly incorrectly, but I think it's within 24 to 48 hours, Lyme has already crossed over into the brain, okay? So even if you are a person that doesn't have Lyme showing up in you in a way that is really impairing your brain function, it's still in the brain, all right? So everyone has a degree of neuro-Lyme, all right? But there's degrees. So more severe neuro-Lyme would be bad thinking, maybe Alzheimer's disease, maybe Parkinson's, maybe multiple sclerosis, maybe seizures or tremors, okay? That would be worse neuro-Lyme. So first thing I want to let you know is everyone has a degree of neuro-Lyme. It's just that some people have greater degrees of it. So with that in mind, the recommendations that I do have to treat Lyme in my treatment guidelines and how I use antibiotics, so the treatment guidelines being the successful treatment recipe that many of you are familiar with at my Lyme disease information site, should work on neuro-Lyme. Also, various antibiotic protocols that I recommend in my Lyme disease antibiotic guide should work on neuro-Lyme, okay? But there are some things that you want to think about if you're having a worst case of neurologic Lyme. So first of all, there are things you can do to repair the nerve function in the brain and nerve function in general, okay? And so there's a whole article I have about this called, I'll show you later. I can't remember the name of it now, but I'll show you later, okay? So some things that you can do to help improve nerve function is to repair the nerves. And what you want to do to repair the nerves is you want to also repair the energy factories found in everybody's cells, whether they're nerve cells or regular cells, and those are called mitochondria. So if you have a degree of neurologic dysfunction, you likely have a degree of mitochondria dysfunction too, okay? Now keep in mind what I'm about ready to describe, the things you do to fix your nerves in your brain, are things that usually for most people, I'm not going to recommend that you start doing until you're about 4 to 6 months into treatment, because often just treating with antibiotics is going to be enough to get your brain working better, okay? But if, say, about 4 to 6 months in, you still are having severe neurologic Lyme, then there's some things that you might want to start thinking about doing, okay? Number one, you want to get on glutathione. So glutathione is a very strong antioxidant that is made in large concentrations in your liver, where it's used to help with detoxification. But glutathione is also the grand fixer. It fixes everything. It's made in every one of our cells, and it's an antioxidant that repairs damage, okay? And so one thing you want to get on is glutathione. One way to do glutathione is to do it orally. And if you do it orally, you want to take a microscopically fat-wrapped version, or we call that a liposomal version, okay? You want to have it microscopically fat-wrapped to increase its absorption. And the product I like for that is a product made by a company called Research Nutritionals. And they have a liposomal variety. And their product is called Trifortify Orange. And you basically want to take 5 milliliters or a teaspoon of that one time a day. All right. Now, you can also get glutathione either by breathing it in as nebulized treatments, or you can do IV glutathione. And I'm not going to go through all the ways of in and outs of using glutathione. I'll show you an article on that in a minute if you want more detail. But you can do it all orally with this Trifortify Orange product, okay? So anyhow, be on glutathione, okay? Second thing you want to do is repair the covering of the nerve cells and repair the covering of the energy factories called mitochondria. And the way you do that is you have to give the kind of fats that make up the nerve cells and the fats that make up the mitochondria energy factories. And that's a product called NT Factor, also made by Research Nutritionals, all right? And that can do a good job of repairing the covering of the nerve cells and the covering of the mitochondria. I like using NT Factor, and you start it at 2 pills 3 times a day for 2 months, and then after 2 months, you decrease it down to 1 pill 3 times a day for 4 more months, all right? All right. Third thing to look at is to be on coenzyme Q10. Coenzyme Q10 is a very strong antioxidant that helps nerve function and also mitochondria function. And you want to take it as 400 milligrams, 1 pill, 2 times a day. Except do not take glutathione if you are on Mepron or Malarone or the generic versions of those that both have a atovaquone in them, okay? Those treatments which are used for babesia don't work if you happen to have coenzyme Q10. So if you're on Mepron, atovaquone, or Malarone, do not take coenzyme Q10. All right. And then the fourth thing that I'll have people on for nerve repair, if they do not eat red meat at all, is to be on something called acetyl L-carnitine. Carnitine is a transport vehicle that carries fat from the outside of the mitochondria to the inside of the mitochondria, where it is then burned into cell fuel, okay? So there's 4 things you can do to help repair your brain nerve cells at 4 to 6 months if you still are having significant neurologic Lyme, okay? Glutathione, acetyl L-carnitine if you're not a red meat eater, NT factor, and then coenzyme Q10. Okay, those are the things I would do. All right, so that's for nerve repair. All right, now, if you're 4 to 6 months into treatment and regular oral antibiotics are not doing well, then I'm going to start thinking about either using IV antibiotics to get up to the brain or an IV equivalent dose of antibiotics. All right. All right, so what do I mean by IV equivalent? Well, they're antibiotics that can work as well as IV antibiotics. So the thing about IV antibiotics, the reason they work so well is that you can dump all kinds, get high concentrations of an antibiotic into the bloodstream. And once it's in the bloodstream, then it can cross over into the brain easier, all right? So that's why you do IV antibiotics. But there's other ways of getting high doses in the bloodstream. One is to do butt muscle injections of something called bicillin. It's a form of penicillin. And if you're to do that, you get an injection 3 times a week. You can do it at home. I teach my patients how to do this, okay? Or a loved one to do it with them, or a friend to do it with them, okay? Or another thing you can do is you can use extremely high doses of oral amoxicillin. So what I mean by really high doses? Well, when we use amoxicillin for things like throat infections or ear infections, we're going to dose it as a 500 milligram pill 3 times a day. All right, so 1,500 milligrams a day. But when you use amoxicillin at really high doses, IV equivalent doses, for an adult, I'm going to dose it anywhere from 3 pills 3 times a day to 4 pills 3 times a day, which is 4,500 milligrams to 6,000 milligrams, okay? And the reason that works is you're putting so much into the bloodstream that it forces its way into the brain tissue, all right? And I have used that successfully to treat people with multiple sclerosis Lyme, for instance, and with Parkinson's Lyme. And in fact, I have found it at times to even work better than IV antibiotics, okay? That's why I call it an IV equivalent treatment, okay? So those are just some thoughts for you. Now, I'm going to do a screen share here so I can show you where to find more information about some of these things that I've talked about. All right, so let's see here. All right, so this is the Treat Lyme book. I think many of you are familiar with it. I talked to you earlier tonight about this Lyme Q&A webinar tab. Tomorrow morning, if you don't get my email by around 6:30 in the morning, click on the Lyme Q&A webinar tab, and that will take you to the webinar page. And then from there, you can click on a link that will take you to the recordings page, okay? All right, so that's one thing. And then the other thing that I want to show here is there's a chapter that I have written about brain and nerves, okay? And you want to take a look at this chapter. There's the other thing I should have mentioned too is I like when people have a significant brain dysfunction, I prefer that people are on a paleo type diet, okay? And that's because being on grains, which is a non-paleo diet, being on diets that are paleo tend not to have a lot of grains, which is better for brain function. Also, a paleo diet that builds in some periodic fasting increases a chemical that promotes nerve growth, okay? So take a look at this diet. This is my paleo diet. So that's one thing you would do, okay? And I forgot to mention that earlier. All right, second thing, and oh, in this diet here, when you get in here, this is one of my free articles, okay? There's a few videos about how to design your diet. There's diet sheets that you can print off. So take a look at that, all right? All right. The other article that you might want to take a look at is this one called My Brain Isn't Working, I Think, What Can I Do? This has all those brain repair things that I was just telling you about. And then if you want to read more about glutathione, why I think it's such a wonderful chemical, and the various ways to get it in, which is orally, you can breathe it in, or you can do it IV, and the dosing that you would use, take a look at this article called Glutathione, the Great Fixer, okay? All right, so let me go back here. Actually, do that first. All right, there we are. All right, so Brenda, thank you for that question. I know that was rather long-winded, but it's not. There's a few things that you need to consider, okay? And again, most people, everyone's got a degree of neurological Lyme because it gets into the brain within, I think, about 48 hours, according to some of the studies that I've seen before, okay? All right. Thanks, Brenda. Good luck to you. Oh, is neurolyme harder to treat? I don't think neurolyme is harder to treat than regular Lyme, to be honest with you. I think it's all can be complicated at times, unfortunately. All right. Hello, Chris. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Marty. Thank you for all you're doing. You're welcome. Thank you for recommending my book. I hope you keep recommending it to a lot of people because I think it's good information for people to use on their own, but also to bring into their doctor's office to give other ideas that maybe some of their doctors aren't thinking about. Okay, so thank you for doing that. I want to try to help as many people as possible with this horrible illness, and that's writing the book is one way that I've been able to do that. Let's see, my yeast question. Let's see, I have a question about yeast. My yeast questionnaire score was 182. However, it seems that Lyme and Bark cause the same or similar symptoms. How can we tell the difference? Is there a specific brand of glutathione you recommend? So I already talked about the glutathione. I recommend a product called Trifortify Orange. I'll show you that to you in a minute so you know what I'm talking about. In terms of the yeast, what Chris is talking about is there is when you have too many yeast in the intestines. So our intestines are full of bacteria and yeast. And by being on antibiotics or because of immune suppression, even before you start your antibiotics, it's very possible that you start growing too many yeast in your intestines. And that can become a problem in Lyme, right? So as many of you know, when somebody has Lyme disease, and I talk about this often in the webinars, the reason that somebody is sick when they have Lyme is that the immune system overproduces a group of chemicals called cytokines. And those cytokines are good and bad. On the good side, they help the immune system work better. But when they're made in excess, they give you all of these symptoms we call Lyme symptoms, okay? If you have too many yeast in the intestines, the immune system also makes too many cytokines, all right? So it becomes another additive factor that keeps you sick by helping create more cytokines. So there's not a good test for yeast. If we were to do stool testing, we would see yeast living in your stool. Well, I expect that. We all have yeast that live in our intestines. And we really don't have a good test that says there's too many yeast, okay? So I don't do stool cultures. What I like to use is a questionnaire that looks at what are the risk factors you have for yeast, what kind of symptoms do you have that suggest yeast, and how intense are they, okay? And that's the questionnaire that Chris is referring to. I'll show you how you can find it here in a minute. What I have found is if people score 140 or higher, that treating yeast makes a difference, okay? So Chris, you asked the question here, how do you know if they're really yeast? You don't fully know. But what I have found is that this score above 140 says there's a great likelihood that treating yeast will make a difference. And yes, Lyme can give similar symptoms, Bartonella can give similar symptoms. But on my questionnaire, if you score over 140, treating yeast can make a difference, okay? Now, there's one caveat that I want to give you, a warning I want to give you about that yeast questionnaire. It's a questionnaire that's good if you haven't treated yeast before. But at some point, if you've done a full-scale yeast treatment with at least 30 days of prescription anti-yeast medicines, not herbal, but prescription anti-yeast medicines, this questionnaire may not be fully valid because the questionnaire looks backwards. It looks at a history of stuff. And if you've already removed that history, dealt with the history by treating your yeast for 30 days with a good treatment protocol, then it may not be as valid. Okay? All right. So anyhow, let me show you a few things here. I'm going to do a quick screen share again. All right, so I'm back in the Treat Lyme book, and I wanted to show everyone there's a chapter on yeast, and you're going to find it under the Germ Control and More subheading here. Okay, there's your yeast chapter. And in here is an article called A Silent Problem, Do You Have Yeast? You can click on this, and within this, you will find the questionnaire that I have that will help you figure out if you have yeast. And I'll show you, there's another place you can find it too for free actually, but it's in this one article, okay? And then if you have too many yeast, take a look at this article called Kills Yeast, a Brief Guide. It talks about prescription ways to manage yeast. It also talks about herbal ways of managing yeast. And it also talks about an experimental treatment that I do for yeast called lufeneron, which can work fairly well and something you can find on your own as well too. Okay, all right. Now I'm going to just show you where else can you find this yeast questionnaire. Well, you can find it in my Lyme disease treatment guideline, all right? So this guideline says, take a look at all the other things you should do besides killing your germ with antibiotics. These are the other steps you should take that you're going to need to do to get well. Recovering from Lyme requires more than antibiotics, okay? And in this article, or in my treatment protocol, which you're going to find again under the treatment protocol tab up here, in my treatment protocol, there is a section on yeast. Part 7 is about yeast. And if you scroll down here, I have a tool called the Yeast Screening Questionnaire. If you click on that, it will take you to the questionnaire that Chris was talking about, okay? All right. Then one other thing. Many of you know I recommend supplements, all right? And I want to make sure that when I recommend supplements that you have a source for good quality supplements. And there's a lot of garbage out there. And there's a huge amount of garbage out there. And in fact, there's been a lot of studies done where our individual groups have gone in, pulled supplements off of shelves, and found that when they studied these supplements for active ingredients, the majority do not have that active ingredients, all right? What I've tried to do here in my supplement store is to work with brands that are primarily sold to doctors. And when I've gone and talked to the companies about the quality of their products, I believe that they have what they say they put in, and that they use the highest quality ingredients, all right? So therefore, they have a good chance of working. That's what I've tried to pick here for you at my supplement store. So if you hear me talking about a supplement and you're wondering, well, what would I use? What product would I use? This is where you would look for it, okay? And you can either do it by looking under the medical problems or by manufacturer, or you can just click on it up here, all right? So glutathione, for instance, what would I use? Well, let's type in glutathione. All right, there's the Trifortify Orange. Okay, so this is the product that I recommend. I've talked to you about it already earlier. All right, so that's the supplement store. So if you're looking at where to get things, that's where you would go about doing it. All right, and then as many of you know, if you're looking about how to treat Lyme, this is the Treat Lyme book. Feel free to read through this. It does require a subscription. Just keep in mind whenever you do subscribe to the Treat Lyme book that you're actually supporting the work of even these webinars as well too. All right. And I do appreciate your subscriptions. All right. Thanks, Chris, for that question. And good luck to you. Bear with me here, everyone. All right. Hello, Sarah. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Tested positive through IGeneX last year. CDC testing negative at the time. Tried herbal treatment for a few weeks earlier this fall. Room tested me for Lyme this week, and it just came back CDC positive. She said only IgM positive, which means it must be acute, can't be old. Thoughts? It's a good question. Now, there is a whole video article that I describe this phenomenon in that I'm about ready to talk with you about. Okay, so In the Treat Lyme book, there's an article I have about the Western blot. But let me talk to you about that, all right? So when we do a Western blot, or the testing that was done was a Western blot using the CDC FDA approved method, okay? Which is a slightly different method than is used by another lab called IGeneX. Many of you have had IGeneX testing done. The standard labs like a Quest or a LabCorp use a test kit that is approved to be sold by the Food and Drug Administration. And the way that it's done is using CDC standards, okay? That's different than IGeneX. IGeneX, which many of you know I like to use, is an independent lab which does not require FDA approval because they don't sell their test kits, all right? So many Lyme disease specialists out there want to discredit IGeneX because they say it's not an FDA approved kit. Well, it doesn't need to be FDA approved because they're not selling it to anyone to use in their lab, okay? And because of that, they can use different standards than what the FDA allows, and they require that you use the CDC standards, all right? So when we do a Western blot, what we're looking to do is we're looking to see, has your immune system made antibodies that attach to proteins found on the covering of the Lyme germ? All right, so it's an antibody test. All right, so what are antibodies? Well, antibodies are proteins made by the immune system that attach to a germ. And once they're attached to the germ, they act like a big radio tower or signaling device that sends out signals to the rest of the immune system that says, hey, I got a germ, come get it. All right. So that's what an antibody is. It's a signaling device that helps bring the immune system in to attack a germ. Now, antibodies don't hold on to the whole germ. They don't just like wrap their arms around a germ, but they hold on to like a small part of that germ, okay? Small pieces of the germ. And what they're holding on to are proteins found on the covering of the germ, all right? So what any germ covering is a layer of fat into which all these proteins are stuck. And in Lyme, there's a phenomenon where the proteins can move around, and that's called epitope switching. So Lyme has many different kinds of proteins, and those proteins have multiple copies, and those proteins can bury themselves in the fat and pop back out. And because of that, what the Lyme germ looks like is always changing. All right, so that's a known phenomenon. That's something called epitope switching, okay? Or it also goes by the name called antigenic variation, all right? So I'm coming to your question, all right? So just keep in mind, the Lyme germ is always changing what it looks like. It always looks new to the immune system because it's always changing what it looks like, okay? So when our immune system makes antibodies, there's a number of families that they make, but the two that are key in infections are called IgM antibodies and IgG antibodies, all right? IgM antibodies are the type of antibodies you make when you first get sick. They're considered to be the acute antibody, all right? And by 6 weeks to 3 months in most infections, they go away and then they get replaced by IgG antibodies. Once you make IgG antibodies, you will keep making those. They don't go away, okay? So they're the memory of the immune system. So when you get somebody that's getting an IgG test back positive for Lyme, you cannot tell by looking at the test whether the germ is still in them or out of them, because once you make IgG antibodies, you're always going to keep making them, okay? Now, when you get IgM antibodies back, it could mean you have an acute infection because they're the acute antibodies. They're the ones that get made first, okay? But 80% of the time that somebody has Lyme, of a year duration or more, they still make IgM antibodies. I want you to hear that again. 80% of the time that somebody has Lyme of a year or more, they still make IgM antibodies, all right? So when you get back an IgM positive, it does not necessarily mean you have acute Lyme. What we think happens is because of this phenomenon I told you about, the proteins moving around, that epitope switching phenomenon, we think the immune system gets tricked into thinking it's seeing a new infection and keeps making the new infection antibodies, okay? So what I want to let you know is most doctors, if you've been sick with Lyme for numbers of years and you get back an IgM positive, they're going to call it a false positive. because they don't realize that this is what happens about 80% of the time in Lyme disease. Now, if you go to a Lyme specialist like me, a Lyme literate medical doctor, we all know this, but the conventional infectious disease doctors don't get it. And your regular family doctors and general internists aren't even aware of this phenomenon, okay? It is a rare germ where you keep making IgMs. So the fact that you're making IgMs does not mean it's acute. It could be, but there still is a chance it could be chronic active, okay? All right. And again, when you get back an IgM, the only way that you can keep making IgM antibodies if you've had Lyme in you for a year or more is if you've got a living infection flipping its proteins around, okay? So it means you got a living germ in you. It could be acute, but if you've had symptoms for over a year, it's probably just the way it's showing up because you've got chronic Lyme, okay? All right. So it's a little complicated, but I just want to make sure you know that. Okay, now a couple other things about the FDA-approved method of doing Western blot and what IGeneX does, okay? So IGeneX, I like, is a better test than the FDA-approved kit for two reasons. Number one, they use 2 strains of the Lyme germ. So they grow them, kill them, take their proteins, and then they test to see, do you have antibodies against those proteins, all right? And for an IgM Western blot, they're looking to see if you have antibodies against 12 proteins. And on the IgG Western blot, they're looking to see if you have antibodies against 12 proteins also, okay? The FDA CDC approved test kit that's used by LabCorp, Quest, PAML, PacLab, all the major lab systems, but the way that Western blot is done is they only look to see if you have antibodies against 3 proteins on the IgM. All right, IGeneX does 12, the FDA kit only does 3, all right? And on the IgG, they do it for 10, IGeneX does for 12, okay? So IGeneX actually does a bigger fingerprint. The other thing that makes IGeneX better is they use 2 strains of Lyme. The FDA-approved kit uses the original strain that was discovered back in the 70s, okay? So even, who knows if that's even relevant for the type of Lyme that's infecting most of the people in our country these days, all right? So those are just some comments about the Western blot. And thank you for that question. I know it's rather long-winded. I think I'm being very long-winded tonight, but I hope you're all learning something useful by some of these long responses I'm giving you tonight too. All right. Good luck to you, Sarah. Hello, Nicole. Hi, Dr. Ross. Any idea why I keep burping bad in the morning? Anything you recommend to repair the stomach? I know I have gastritis, esophagitis from an endoscopy back in 2014. I do not want to take a proton pump inhibitor, which is a PPI, everyone, because it causes malabsorption. All right, so when you have gastritis means inflammation of the stomach lining, okay? And esophagitis means inflammation of the food pipe. One of the things that you could do for that is to coat them, to cover them, all right? And there's 2 ways you can do that. One is to get herbal medicinal licorice, all right? So it's a supplement, and it's a form of licorice called deglycerated licorice, and they come in tablets. When you chew licorice tablets, your spit interacts with chemicals in the licorice, forming a microscopic gelatinous coat. And that microscopic coat covers the stomach lining, covers your food pipe lining, okay? So I use it in people that develop gastritis during treatment. Usually they're going to develop it from being on some of the antibiotics that we use, all right? Especially the tetracycline. It's very common for that to happen, the tetracyclines. It can also happen with my 2 favorite herbs that I use to kill Lyme, Banderol Cemento. I think many of you have heard me talk about those products before. But even with Banderol Cemento, it can happen. So I like using licorice. So you want to get a form called deglycerated licorice. And what that means is there's a chemical group called the glycyrrhiza group that's removed from the licorice. And when you remove that group from licorice, it makes it so there's less of a chance of it giving high blood pressure. Okay, that's why it's removed. And usually, depending on the brand, it's going to come as a 300 or 320 milligram tablet. And you want to chew 2 tablets before food 3 times a day and before bed. Or if you happen to be a person that's just getting this gastritis or this kind of heartburn feeling around the time that you've taken your antibiotics, take it before the antibiotics, half hour before the antibiotics, or right as you're taking the antibiotics, or right before you take the antibiotics, I should say. Again, chew 2 tablets, okay? The product that I like for this is something made by Integrative Therapeutics called Simulate, or called Rhizinate. It's Rhizinate. That's a form of deglycerated licorice that I like to use. And because it's a PPI, because it's not a PPI and doesn't do anything about acid levels, it's not going to disturb your digestion. Okay? All right. Now, that's the herbal way. Okay, the prescription way is to use a prescription medicine called Carafate. That's Carafate, or also known as sucralfate. And this is a microscopic fat as well, too, that can line your food pipe and your stomach. It's 1 gram, and you would take it 4 times a day, 3 of those being before meals, and 1 of those at night before you go to bed. Okay, that's the way I would do it. There's a third thing you can do, which is another herbal method, which is to use 1 ounce of aloe vera gel or aloe vera juice before meals 3 times a day too. Aloe can help do a good coating as well too. Okay, all right. Good luck, Nicole, and thank you for that question. Hello, Birgitta. Let's see. Hello, Dr. Ross. My LLMD does not recommend tooth root canals for Lyme patients. What is your opinion? Thanks. So there's no good science on this one, okay? But when you get a root canal, it's possible that it leaves pockets, like little micro caves, if you will, where Lyme can get in and inhabit. All right. And it's not uncommon that you'll see somebody that's had root canals in Lyme and they're having a hard time getting better. And if you just have them have that tooth pulled out, their Lyme will get better. So sometimes it can be a pocket of infection. Now, what percentage of the time does this happen? I don't know. We don't have any research to show it. But if I've got somebody and they're locked in their treatment, they're not getting better, they've got root canals, sometimes I'm going to just say, we got to get that root canal taken out. We got to get that tooth pulled. Okay, so that's the problem with the root canals, okay? Thank you for that question. Hello, Ryan. Let's see, can Bartonella mold cause leg weakness, or is it just a Lyme symptom? Do you recommend taking NT factor chewables for this? So Bartonella can give leg weakness because Bartonella can cause nerve dysfunction. And if your nerves aren't working correctly, you can have weakness from that, okay? So yes, Bartonella can do it. Lyme can do the same thing too. Mold, so that would be from neurologic dysfunction causing your muscles not to work correctly, okay? Mold can sometimes give leg weakness too. And the way that mold toxins, if you happen to be somebody that has mold toxicity issues, what mold toxins do is they can injure the energy factories in our cells called mitochondria. And I mentioned that earlier time. I talked about nerve repair. I said the things we do for nerve repair or brain repair would fix mitochondria. Mitochondria are the energy factories found in every one of our cells. By some estimates, we have 300 to 400 of them. And if they get injured, then you have sluggish energy generation. And sluggish energy generation can lead to weakness. So for some, yeah, you can have mitochondria dysfunction caused by mold toxicity, all right? So how do you treat it? Get the mold toxins out. But the other thing sometimes you need to do, if you try getting mold toxins out, and you're using like a cholestyramine, for instance, for like 2 to 3 months, and you're just not getting better with that weakness, then sometimes you do need to go in and repair the mitochondria, all right? So how do you repair mitochondria? Well, I'm not going to do a full answer here, but I'm going to do a quick screen share and show you where you can find that information. Again, I talked about it earlier in terms of brain cell repair. The things you do for nerve cell repair are also going to fix your mitochondria. But if you want to just look at that article, there's an article called Energy and Fatigue here, or a chapter called Energy and Fatigue. Take a look at my article called Power Up Energy and Mitochondria. And this is where I talk about how you correct, how you fix mitochondria dysfunction, okay? All right, hold on, everyone. I'm sorry here. Okay, so let's let me get back here. Okay, so anyhow, thanks for that question, Ryan. Let's see. Hello, Karen. Let's see. What do you recommend for adrenal support? So you can take a look at my, for just common things, everyone, read my book, okay? You'll see a lot of this stuff is in there. And in fact, for this question, Karen, you could take a look at the successful treatment recipe where one of the central things I say for anyone to recover from Lyme is adrenal support, all right? So what I recommend is the herb called ashwagandha. It's a Chinese medicine, East Indian medicine herb that has been used for thousands of years as something called an adaptogen, something that helps you deal with stress. And it's used because it's been observed in humans to give better energy. Okay, so that's why it's been used. All right. Now, we don't have great human studies on it, but we do have animal studies. And what the animal studies show us is that you get better thyroid function and you get better adrenal function. Okay. And then my favorite experiments regarding this is the rat swimming pool experiments. And I have some visions of the rats standing around on the pool deck wearing their goggles and bathing suits as I was reading that. But evidently, rats given ashwagandha will swim twice as far as rats that don't have ashwagandha. Okay, so those are the animal experiments that we have. There's also some other rat experiments and other animal experiments that show better adrenal and thyroid function. Right, so in terms of how you dose it, I use it as a 400 milligram pill. I have people take a couple pills in the morning and a couple pills between 1 and 2. I don't like taking it too late in the afternoon because if you do, it may keep you awake at night. Okay, so that's why I dose it earlier. Okay, now why do I choose ashwagandha? Because there are other herbs you can use too. You can use something called rhodiola. You can use something called ginseng. Generally, I don't like using those other herbs, and cordyceps is another one. The reason I don't like doing those other ways is energetically they're too hot. All right. So energetically hot things can make you more jittery or shaky. They can falsely rev you up. All right. Ashwagandha comes in energetically neutral. It's not hot or cold. All right. The problem when you use a hot herb is in Lyme, most of us are energy depleted. All right. So, or you can look at it in the Chinese medicine terms, there's yang and there's yin energy. Most of us are yin depleted. And if we give something that's yang, like a hot herb, and we don't have enough yin energy to hold it down, you're going to get really jittery and shaky. I tend not to find that happen with ashwagandha, which is the reason that I tend to use that. Okay. All right. Thank you for that question, Karen. Hello, Marcy. Hold on here just a minute. I got to take a quick swig of water here. Okay, see, since the onset of Lyme, my daughter got ketosis pilaris on the face. What is it associated with Lyme and how do you treat it? So it can occur in Lyme. It can occur for other reasons too. It's a type of skin rash, everyone, that gives you a bunch of bumps. The way to treat it is to get your Lyme under control. So all the things I recommend in my successful treatment recipe, my treatment protocol, treat Lyme, and that will help get that under control. But beyond there is not a specific treatment for it, okay? All right, let me see here. All right. Marcy, thanks for that question. I'm going to take one more from you too here. Let's see. When brain fog is so severe and we have followed all your suggestions for treatment, what is the next step? So for severe brain fog, make sure that you have done everything you can to treat Bartonella if it's not getting better. Make sure you've considered if yeast is in you or not. So look at my yeast questionnaire because yeast can produce brain fog too. And then do the brain repair kind of things I suggested earlier tonight, okay? Those would be some of the key steps that I'd recommend. If you've tried all those and you want some additional steps, you might consider doing one of my one-to-one medical consults or visiting with me more directly so that I can ask you more specific questions, all right? So for instance, so if you're wondering what I'm talking about with that, there's this tab here on the Treat Lyme book called Online Consult. You can read more about the way that I can visit with you online to help recommend changes to your treatment. And these are changes you could bring to your doctor. I write a whole visit note that I share with you, and I do these as Skype visits, okay? So if you're interested, take a look here. You can send me information. I read everything here about how it works and the disclaimer, because there's one one thing about these consults that you should be aware of is that because I don't prescribe for, or because I don't get to examine you, I don't get to lay hands on you, my medical board will not let me prescribe. Okay. So that's the only drawback to them. I can't prescribe or order tests, but I can give you a lot of good input that you could take forward to a doctor and come up with some ideas, maybe even herbs that might give you some benefit too. Okay. And then one last thing you might want to consider, brain fog can mean different things to different people. So brain fog sometimes means a feeling of cloudiness or fogginess around the brain. Brain fog also means dysfunction. Your brain just isn't working right. Okay. If it is a dysfunction, one of the things that can help is lithium at nutrient doses. Okay. So many of you may be aware we use lithium for a psychiatric problem called bipolar illness. And when we use it for that, manic depression, bipolar illness, we're going to dose it like 600 to 900 milligrams a day. All right. So that's high doses. But when we use it at nutrient doses to help brain function, nerve function, it comes as a 5 milligram pill. It's called lithium orotate. That's OROTATE. And 5 milligrams 3 times a day. There are studies that show that it increases what is known as nerve signaling, which is the ability for nerves to talk, and therefore helps with your thinking. Okay. So 5 milligrams 3 times a day. I'd give it a couple month try to see if that might make a difference too. The other thing about lithium that's nice is it can help limit brain toxicity as well too. Okay. All right. Thanks for that question. Hello, Randy. Let's see. I just started taking Ennula for Babesia along with Banderol and Cemento. Is this what you recommend, or skip Banderol? Anything else you would suggest taking? I have awful pain in the front of my head, plus flashbacks of things I haven't thought about in years. Very strange. So, all right. So Ennula and the Banderol and the Cemento all come to us out of something called the Cowden Protocol. All right. And I have found the only part that I think has any sense and even works out of the Cowden Protocol is the Banderol Cemento. I'm not a big believer in the Ennula. All right. So to answer your question, I don't use Ennula because I haven't found it to work well. What I like using is the Banderol Cemento. I find they work about 85 to 90% of the time. I use them continuously. I don't pulse them the way that they do in the Cowden Protocol. Where I learned to use them was based on Petri dish experiments that came out about 5 or 6 years ago by a researcher named Eva Choppy. She's doing some of the best Lyme disease research in the country. She runs a lab out in New Haven, Connecticut. And what she showed on Petri dish experiments is that Banderol Cemento get rid of all 3 forms of the Lyme germ. And when you use them together, get a whopping kill, more than you might think they should. Okay, so they add together more. Well, actually, they have a synergistic effect where they do more than their added effect together. Okay, and that they remove 100% of biofilm. Okay, that's pretty impressive. So based on her research that came out about 5 or 6 years ago, I started using those 2 herbs in my practice. And what I find is they work 85 to 90% of the time. Okay. In terms of the head pain, I would need to ask you a lot more questions about specifically what is happening with that. But one thing that can help head pain is magnesium. I like using magnesium malate, anywhere from about 400 to 600 milligrams at nighttime. If you start using it at dose range, be aware you could get diarrhea from it. If you do, just back down in the dose. But magnesium, if we build up magnesium, it can sometimes help with headaches. Okay. Other things to think about with bad headaches in the front of the head is babesia. So take a look at my articles that help you figure out if you have babesia. Most of that's determined based on your symptoms. Let me do a quick screen share so show you where you can take a look at this later. All right, so I'm back in the Treat Lyme book. To figure out if you have Lyme, if you have babesia or Bartonella or Lyme, take a look at my chapter called How to Diagnose. And there's an article in here about how to diagnose babesia. Take a look at this. It's a clinical diagnosis. It's based on symptoms, okay? But take a look at that article. That will help you help figure out if you might have babesia, giving you some of those headaches, okay? All right, let me go back here. All right, so, Oh, there was one other thing I was going to show you back here. I'm sorry. I knew I'd forgotten one thing. Let me go back there again. All right, so take a look also at the chapter on, it's called anti-germs. Where did I put that? Oh, here it is. Anti-germs, RXs and herbs, okay? And take a look at the, if you want to know more about Banderol Cemento and even see the research that supports their use, take a look at this article called Otoba Bark Extract and Cat's Claw. In here, I talk about Dr. Toppy's work. I talk about how I have found the best way to use these, and I do not do them the way that Cowden recommends in the Cowden protocol. I do it a different way. So take a look here and you'll see how I recommend using it, okay? All right. Thank you, Randy, for that question. Good luck. Hello, Sarah. Thanks for taking the time for giving these very helpful webinars. You're welcome. Previously, you said that Lyme likes to live in cartilage. Does Lyme always move around, or is it possible that it can just lodge in one area? Can a bone-on-bone situation where cartilage has been destroyed always regenerate? Okay, so Lyme symptoms migrate around. I mean, it's a very common phenomenon where sometimes one person hurts here one day, then over there. This joint bothers you one day, this joint the next day. So the symptoms may wander around. That's a very common phenomenon in Lyme. Lyme likes, in terms of whether Lyme itself, the germ moves from one location to one location, I'm not so sure about that. What I would tell you is I think Lyme is everywhere. I mean, Lyme likes to get into all of our tissues. It just may be that it manifests itself more in certain tissues, but Lyme likes to live in any tissue that doesn't have good oxygenation, okay? And in some of us, that means that it will break down our cartilage so that it can bury itself into cartilage. Can you regenerate that cartilage in a joint so that you're, instead of having bone rubbing on bone, you're getting cartilage rubbing on cartilage? Because a healthy joint has cartilage covering the surface of the bones, and then you get, when bones don't directly touch each other, it's actually the cartilage that covers them that touches the cartilage on the next bone. Cartilage is smooth and glossy. It's slightly spongy too, and so it acts as a little bit of shock absorber and it allows the bones to glide over each other easily. Can you regenerate that? Yeah. One of the things that can regenerate it is glucosamine sulfate, and glucosamine sulfate comes as a 500 milligram pill. It's the building block for cartilage. And if you give more of the building blocks for cartilage or to the bones, they will start regenerating cartilage. How often does it work in Lyme? It's hard to say. No one's done research on it, okay? What I can tell you is in my days as a family doctor before I moved into specializing in Lyme disease, this used to be one of the big things I would do, and I would see in non-Lyme patients that it would help regenerate cartilage about 60 to 70% of the time. So, and that's for people that have worn down their cartilage naturally, okay? In my Lyme patients that still have a lot of joint problems, even when they get on my favorite anti-inflammatory in Lyme, curcumin, and if that's not helping, and we've treated their Lyme for 6 to 9 months, for instance, and they're not getting better, then I'm going to start rebuilding with cartilage. I don't know, maybe about 50 or 60% of the time it works. Don't hold me hard to that one because, again, I don't have research to give you that information. It's more of my observation on it, okay? But 500 milligrams 3 times a day, just so you know, you can find glucosamine out there as a 1 time a day pill. 1,500 milligrams 1 time a day, don't do it. For glucosamine to work best, it needs to be at 500 milligrams 3 times a day. You need to maintain good drug levels, and the way you maintain good drug levels is to frequently redose it. So it needs to be taken 3 times a day, okay? Thank you for that question. Hello, Nikki. Let's see, how big of a role does mold play in Lyme, and how should one go about treating it? All right. So if we look at, there's a physician named Richie Shoemaker, who is the pioneer of the issues of mold toxicity in Lyme and not in Lyme, okay? And then some of his work has been replaced and I think greatly improved by more recent work that's been done by a physician named Joe Brewer, who's an infectious disease doctor in Kansas. All right. So I'm going to talk about both of them to answer your question. So what Shoemaker was able to show is in all people, not just Lyme patients, okay, but in all people, 25% of us have a genetic programming issue where we're not able to remove mold toxins once they get into us, okay? And that's based on Shoemaker's work, all right? And Shoemaker has a genetic profile test called an HLA-DR test that you can do to see if you might be susceptible to this problem. But the reality is, I don't find his test to always be an accurate predictor, and I don't do it. I think it's a waste of money. It's about a $1,200 test. It's a waste of money, okay? But according to Shoemaker's work, 25% of us have this problem. And what's supposed to happen in 75% of us is the immune system will see a mold toxin once we breathe it in or drink it in, and we'll tag it for removal, and it gets broken down and gets removed from the body, okay? That's what's supposed to happen to 75% of us. In 25% of us, though, what happens is those mold toxins don't get tagged. They go to the liver as a fat-based toxin. Now, the liver is supposed to change things that are fat-based into a water-based form, where they then get moved out in the intestines, they mix in our poop, and we poop them out. Okay, that's what the liver is supposed to do. But with mold toxins, it can't do it. And it takes those mold toxins, and they go to the liver fat-based, they come out fat-based, they go into the intestines, and things that are fat-based in the intestines get reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. So you get this mold that just keeps, mold toxins that just keep recirculating, all right? All right, so mold toxicity can look a lot like Lyme disease. In fact, they can look kind of identical at times, all right? And here's why. So as many of you know, when somebody has Lyme disease, I say it's a syndrome of too many cytokines, right? I mentioned that earlier tonight. When you have Lyme, the immune system sees Lyme, and white blood cells, to get rid of Lyme, make a group of inflammation chemicals called cytokines. And they're good. They turn the immune system on, but Lyme doesn't do a good job, or immune system doesn't do a good job of getting rid of Lyme often. And the immune system tries harder and harder, and eventually it makes too many cytokines. And too many cytokines give you most of what we call Lyme symptoms, okay? They make it so you can't think. They make it so you can't sleep. They make you hurt all over. They give muscle wasting. They give you weakness, etc. All those Lyme symptoms are really too many cytokine symptoms, okay? Now, when you have toxins circulating in you, the immune system sees them and also makes cytokines. So guess what? Mold toxicity can look identical to cytokine issues, okay? And because 25% of people out there, whether they have Lyme or not, are genetically programmed in a way they can't remove mold toxins, that means that probably 25% of people with Lyme also have the same problem, all right? All right, so Shoemaker would say we should all do his genetic test, this HLA-DR test. But what I have found is even when it suggests that somebody might have a mold toxicity problem, if you give them the things to bind up the mold toxins, often they don't get better. So it means his test is not correctly identifying them. Also, if you have people that his testing says don't have the problem, often if you give them the mold binders, they're still going to get better, okay? All right, so what does Shoemaker use? Well, Shoemaker likes to use something called cholestyramine, which is a anti-cholesterol medicine. It binds cholesterol. And that's what he suggests, that you actually do a scoop of this 3 times a day. Now, I got to tell you, or 4 times, 3 to 4 times a day. In Lyme, when you've got somebody with Lyme disease and mold toxicity, if you try to do 3 scoops a day of cholestyramine right away, you're going to get clobbered, all right? Shoemaker does not take care of the same kind of patients I take care of, all right? You can't do it. What happens is if you start the cholestyramine too quickly, pulling those toxins out triggers a cytokine flare, which can look like a Herxheimer reaction, okay? But it's a cytokine flare. You can get clobbered. So if I am going to do cholestyramine, if I've got somebody that I'm trying to see, could they have this problem? And they've got a history of a lot of mold exposures in their background. They've lived in a building they know had mold in it. What I will do often is not do Shoemaker's genetic testing, but rather I will just do a trial of cholestyramine. And I will do it at 1 scoop 3 times a day. But I build up to it. I start often at 1 scoop 1 time a day. And if they're not reacting to it after a week, I mean, if they're not flared up by it, then I may go to 1 scoop 2 times a day. And after another week, I may go to 1 scoop 3 times a day. All right. When you use cholestyramine, you got to make sure that you take it away from, you have to take it away from medicine. So you have to stop all your medicine and supplements 30 minutes before you take it, and then you resume taking them up to 2 hours later. The ideal time to eat is a half hour after you take the cholestyramine, okay? So that's cholestyramine, all right? Now, then we got Joe Brewer. And Brewer has been able to show, Dr. Joe Brewer has now been able to show, working with a lab out of Texas called Real Time Labs, we now have a way to measure whether what toxins you actually have in you, okay? And Real Times has the ability to look to see if you have 4 different kinds of toxins. One is called trichosethine, which is black mold toxin, something called aflatoxin, something called ochratoxin, and something called gliotoxin. Now, gliotoxin, I want to let you know, does not only come from wet buildings, it can come from too many yeast living in you as well, too, all right? All right. Now, Brewer has done a lot of his work based on using real-time labs. And what Brewer has been able to show is that when people have chronic fatigue syndrome, not Lyme, but chronic fatigue syndrome, about 80 to 85% of them also have mold toxicity issues. It's pretty profound, actually, okay? And so what you can do with the real-time labs is you can actually document, does somebody pee out mold toxins? And if they do, then after you do your binders, then you can go back again and retest them to see if they're gone. Pretty good stuff, okay? Now, the problem with the real-time labs test, though, is it's ridiculously expensive. It's $795, okay, for the first test. Now, if you're going to do repeat testing, and I'll do that, and I think a repeat test is $195. So once you're in their system, you can get repeat testing done, okay? Now, why would you even want to do the real-time lab? So often I am going to do just a cholestyramine trial. But more recently, Brewer has been looking at the literature and looking at what binders work best for which toxins, okay? And cholestyramine may not always be the best binder. So for instance, charcoal may do a better job at binding trichosethine than what cholestyramine does, for instance, okay? And gliotoxin may be better bound by bentonite clay, for instance, okay? So it all depends on what you pee out as to what the best binder is going to be. I still tend to work a lot more with cholestyramine. I think it's a better universal binder. But if I'm working with somebody and I'm using cholestyramine and I go back and retest and their toxins aren't dropping, I'm going to start tailoring my binder based on what the toxin is that they actually pee out, okay? And I always have to look at my chart, so I'm not going to be able to give it to you directly off the top of my head. But depending on that toxin profile, and one of these days I will update, actually probably within the next week or two, I will update my mold toxicity article and include in there a table that will show you, depending on the toxin you pee out, what is the best binder to use, okay? So I will be doing an update. I'll probably use this as a video clip tonight to talk about where the science has gone, okay? All right, the last thing is, even if you're using the right binder and you are still peeing out toxins, Brewer then has shown that some of us become colonized with our mold. That's not a good thing. What that means is that when you become colonized, is that the mold can live in the mucus of your sinuses, or it can live in the lining of your gut, and it may from there then keep releasing toxins. So generally what I'm going to do, if I think I've got somebody with a possibility of mold toxicity issues, I'm going to, based on their history, I'm going to first try a trial of cholestyramine. And if they get better, great. If they don't, then I'm going to wind up doing one of these real-time lab studies to see, are they really peeing the stuff out, okay? And if they are, then I'm going to tailor my anti-mold agent based on, or anti-mold toxin agent based on what they're actually peeing out. And if they still remain sick after binding for another month or two, then I may start actually giving them killers to kill the mold toxins. And those can be nystatin nose spray, itraconazole nose spray, amphotericin nose spray, a couple times a day on both of those. Or And you need to combine it with something to kill yeast in the gut, which would be something called itraconazole. Okay, so this gets to be a really complex issue. All right, so there's not a simple answer. I hope to update my article based on what I've just told you here within the next week or two as well too. All right, but before I get to that, my article on using pulsed antibiotics should be out in the next. All right, so anyhow, thanks, Nikki. I hope that gives you some thoughts on that. And thank you for that question. Hello, Greg. Hello from City again. Let's see. Do you think Borrelia resides in salivary glands? Be passed through. There is no evidence, nor have I ever. Lyme has been missing or shared food. Lyme, and I have not seen evidence that says it's in the saliva. And even if it is, I still don't think there's evidence that says it is transmitted this way. Okay, so my answer would be I don't think so. All right. Thanks for that question. Hello, Jenny. Let's see. Thanks for your medical advice. I've had numbness of my tongue and mucus inside my mouth for 1.5 years. It started 1 year after the tick bite, and while I was taking andrographis, Japanese knotweed, cat's claw, doxy, and flagyl, I have metal toxicity. Why do I have this? I think you're referring to the numbness in your mouth. Okay, so first of all, it's possible that you have nerve injury from having had Lyme and or possibly Bartonella. So if they did not consider Bartonella with you, you should consider Bartonella. Okay, that's one thing. Hold on just a minute. I'm sorry. All right. So, and the regimen you are on of knotweeds, cat's claw, andrographis, those are not things that are generally going to treat Bartonella. Doxy and flagyl will not treat Bartonella either. Okay, so look at in the Treat Lyme book. There is an article I have about how called "It Could Be Bartonella or Babesia: The Signs and Symptoms." Take a look at that article. You'll find it in the How to Diagnose chapter. Read that. You'll see the various symptoms that people would have with Bartonella. Take a look at that. If you have a lot of those, you should be treated for Bartonella, and that could be why you have some of the numbness still. Okay. All right. The other problem is flagyl sometimes can give neuropathy. Unfortunately, flagyl can give neuropathy and or nerve injury and neuropathy, therefore numbness. And one of the things that you can do to help correct that is to take vitamin B6, and you want to do a 50 to 100 milligram pill 1 time a day. All right. Try it for 2 to 3 months, see if it makes a difference. I hope somewhere along the way that somebody checked a vitamin B12 level in you and that it's at least 500 or higher, and that somebody checked a vitamin D3, also known as vitamin D25 hydroxy, and that is at least 70 or higher. Okay, now most doctors only use vitamin D up to about 40. They consider that normal. But when you've got injury problems of your nerves, vitamin D up at about 70 or higher can help heal some of that injury. So I would look at vitamin D as well too, okay? And then finally, take a look at my recommendations about how to repair nerve injury. Now, I talked about those recommendations tonight when I talked about how to repair brain injury, because they're the same things you would do to repair nerve injury. But I'm not going to go back over those now because I already covered those earlier tonight. But if you happen to have missed that and you don't want to wait for the recording to come out tomorrow morning, let me show you where you can find that information. All right, so in terms of where to find information about nerve repair, take a look at my chapter on brain and nerves in the Treat Lyme book. Take a look at this article called Neuropathy Repair, Heal That Tingling, Numbness, and Pain, okay? This tells you all the steps you would need to work with supplements to help repair that nerve injury, all right? And then, again, I told you earlier about how to diagnose. Take a look at this article called It Could Be Bartonella or Babesia: The Signs and Symptoms. Read through this. You're going to see that it gives you the information you need to figure out if you have Bartonella that could be a contributing factor to that neuropathy that you still have in your mouth. Okay? All right. Good luck to you, Jenny. Thank you for that question. Hello, Lisa. Let's see. What dose of curcumin and magnesium for an 8-year-old 60-pound? How is it best to modify doses for your online book for 60-pound child? Okay. So when it comes to herbal medicine, this is not as precise as prescription medicine, okay? So generally, the doses that I have in the Treat Lyme book would be based on an adult that weighs somewhere around 150 to 200 pounds, okay? So your 60-pound child is roughly a third to one half of an adult size, all right? This is just rough, okay? Keep in mind, these are herbs, so you've got a little bit of latitude on it, all right? What I would probably do with your 60-pound child is take most of my recommendations and cut them in half. Now, for curcumin, that means you could do, instead of 500 milligrams 3 times a day, you could do it roughly as 500 milligrams twice a day, or you can get, Thorne makes a curcumin product called Mariva SR, which is a 250 milligram of their Mariva curcumin product. I use their Mariva 500, which is the 500 milligram curcumin product, okay? But you can get Mariva SR. I don't carry it at my store, but you can find that somewhere else, all right? And then magnesium, a good adult dose to take once a day is 400, 600 milligrams. I'd probably try 200 to 300 milligrams with your 60-pound child, okay? If it's too much, they're going to get diarrhea. That means, you've gone too far on that. All right. All right. Good luck to you, Lisa. Thank you for that question. Good luck to your child, too. Hello, Liz. Let's see. I have been advised to trial a PEMF mat for Lyme. Would you recommend that? I don't know what a PEMF mat is. If you would like, Liz, so it may be that I just don't understand the initials that you used here too. Feel free to write that question to me, write it to me. And I'll try to get to it later tonight or tomorrow. My email address is docmarty, it's DOCMARTY and it's my practice name. It's the longest, most ridiculous email length in the world, but my practice is called thehealingartspartnership.net. So it's Doc Marty at the Healing Arts with an S on the arts, okay, partnership.net. And if you would write to me more what you mean by PEMF, if there are not initials but actually words that the PEMF stands for, if you'd send that to me, I'd be able to give you a comment, okay? All right, thank you for that question, Liz. Hello, Marcy. You're amazing. Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's see. You have so very selflessly helped all those with Lyme. No question. Just Marcy. Thank you. I really do appreciate that. That's very sweet. It's my mission. I want to help as many people as possible. So thank you. Hello, Ken. Let's see. Should a person with Lyme have an annual flu shot? If not, what's the best way to treat the flu? Good question. So I don't recommend the flu vaccine unless we get into a year where we suddenly start seeing that the flu that has hit is the one that's killing everyone, okay? And I literally mean that, killing people, okay? And so here's why I don't recommend the flu vaccine. So when you consider whether to take something, you have to weigh out risk and benefits, okay? So the benefit of the flu vaccine is that it can help prevent you from getting flu, all right? But it only works about 50% of the time. If we go back and look at the end of a flu season and we figure out what percent of the time did that flu vaccine work, it only works 50% of the time, okay? All right, and then there's a risk. So when you get the flu vaccine in Lyme, often Lyme gets more active. And it can take months to climb back out of that again, okay? Now, we're not clear why this happens. We all hypothesize it probably has something to do with immune suppression related to Lyme. When the immune system is having to do with the flu vaccine, it just doesn't focus on Lyme well enough, and then Lyme takes off. But generally, because of that, I do not recommend the flu vaccine, okay? Now, there are times I might. So if I've got somebody that has a history of bad asthma, if I've got somebody that where if they get the flu, they're not going to tolerate it well, or if I have a diabetic, those are situations I might go ahead and do it because people that are diabetics don't do well with the flu either, okay? If I've got a frail 65 or over person, I might do it in those kind of situations. But generally, I prefer not to do the flu vaccine for the reason I just said, okay? So what can you do? Well, one thing to do that I would suggest is to keep something on hand. And when you start to get virus type symptoms, so sore throat, stuffy nose, chills, start taking this right away. And it's a product called ProBoost. It's PROBOOST. And what ProBoost is, it's a protein that comes from your thymus gland. Your thymus gland is an organ that sits here in the chest, and it's an immune system organ. It's big when we're kids. It's not really that functional as an adult. And it makes this protein called thymus gland protein A or thymic protein A. Thymic protein A acutely turns on the antiviral part of your immune system. And if you take it at the first outset of a virus infection, you can often stop a virus in its tracks, okay? And the way you do it, it comes as a powder, and you put it under your tongue, you dissolve it there. I have people take it every 2 hours for 3 doses on the first day, 3 times. So just take it 3 times, okay? And then on the second day, spread it out every 8 hours for 3 more doses, and then you're done. But you got to take it right away for it to work, okay? The other thing you can use is to take that along with olive leaf extract. It's a 500 milligram pill. Olive leaf extract kills viruses, all right? And that's 1 pill 3 times a day. And I would do that for 7 to 10 days. Now, the key to both of these is you got to buy them in advance and have them ready to go, okay? And so I would call this my viral and cold flu package. In fact, if you want to read more about it, I actually have a whole article about this. All right, so let's see. I'm going to go back into the chapters. I'm going to look at infection treatment plans. And it's this article called Keep This Cold and Flu Package on Hand for Fast Results, okay? So read through this. You're going to see what my recommendations are. There's even, you can even work with reishi gano mushrooms, which you would take twice a day, or 1 pill 4 times a day. Reishi mushrooms turn on the antiviral system. And often what I'll do, if we're in viral season, I've got a person that keeps getting every virus that comes along. What I'm going to do is have them take reishi gano mushroom, 1 pill 3 times a day throughout the whole flu and viral season to help prevent it from happening, okay? And then only if they start getting any kind of symptoms that look like a virus, then you start taking that ProBoost, the thymic gland protein A ProBoost that I was just talking about, okay? All right. All right, let me just do a quick screen share here too. I'm going to show you one more thing. All right, so this is back again at my Lyme disease supplement store. So in terms of cold and flu, let me just see if I still have this up. Doesn't look like I have it. So what you want to do is there's the ProBoost is the one product. All right, so it comes in 2 sizes. You get a 30 pack or a 12 pack. All right. The other thing that I mentioned was the reishi gano mushrooms. And these, you can find it in 2 products I have, but this one right here is the main product. This is the one I would use too. This brand, JHS Naturals, does a good hot water extraction. You got to be careful with mushrooms. If you get a product that grinds up its mushrooms, you're going to get a lot of mold that comes with that. But if you do a nice hot water extraction, which is what this JHS Naturals does, you're going to have a clean product. It's not going to hurt you. Okay, so I'd recommend that too. And then finally, as I mentioned, the antivirus medicine, a virus killer, is olive leaf extract, and I recommend a Thorn product for that. Okay. All right, so Ken, just take a look at those ideas, okay? And good question, and we're definitely coming into that time of year here. Hello, Annie. Let's see. Thank you, Dr. Ross, for the webinars. You're welcome. I tested positive for anaplasmosis in mid-October and am on doxycycline. I read on one of your pages that you do not recommend taking antibiotics and herbs, Banderol cemento, at the same time. Do you recommend that I wait to take those herbs until done with doxy? Good question. So, there's a two co-infections. So co-infections, everyone, are germs that a tick will transmit in addition to the Lyme, okay? Bartonella and Babesia, I've already mentioned those tonight. The two other ones would be Anaplasma and Ehrlichia. Anaplasma and Ehrlichia give a lot of muscle pains. That can be a common sign of them, sometimes high temperatures too. What treats them is at least 2 to 4 weeks of a tetracycline. So the doxycycline treats them. Now, I usually don't test specifically for them, and the reason I don't is that somewhere in my Lyme treatments, I'm always going to make sure I put somebody on a tetracycline for at least 2 weeks, because a tetracycline also treats intracellular Lyme and spirochete Lyme. Remember, Lyme germs have 3 forms, so doxy is going to treat intracellular Lyme, spirochete Lyme, that's the thing that looks like a corkscrew, and the cyst form of Lyme, okay? Now, I know what I've written, but sometimes, at times, I will go ahead and combine. I think this is a time you could do it. You can do a Banderol cemento along with the doxy. I would go ahead and do it because your Banderol cemento will also pick up the cyst form of your Lyme. Now, you could hold off on your Banderol cemento until you're done with doxy. And if you want to make your doxy into more of a full treatment, what you can add instead of Banderol cemento is get grapefruit seed extract, actually. Grapefruit seed extract kills the cyst form of Lyme, while your doxycycline is going to take care of intracellular Lyme and spirochete Lyme. Okay, so that's another way of doing it as well. Grapefruit seed extract, 250 milligrams, 1 pill 2 times a day. Okay, all right. Thanks for that question, Annie. Hello, Nikki. Let's see. I have recently heard about CBD oil for Lyme. Do you know anything about that? Also, how common is mold with Lyme? So I already talked about mold earlier. It probably happens about 25% of the time, if we look at what Shoemaker's work has told us, okay? CBD oil can be quite beneficial, actually. So when we look at marijuana can be used medicinally. The difficulty here in the States is that our government has banned research on it. So, and across most of the world, there's just not good research about marijuana. All right, but when you look at marijuana, there's the bud, the bloom part of the plant. That's what people use recreationally. That's rich in a chemical called THC. All right. Now it has medicinal qualities too, THC, but THC gives you your high. It can help manage pain, it can help nausea, it can help you get an increased appetite, and may kill Lyme. All right, it may kill Lyme. All right, the other part of the plant, the green parts of the marijuana plant, the stems and the leaves, are all rich in an oil called CBD or cannabinoid oil. All right, and CBD has the same medicinal effects as THC, including pain control. Maybe not quite as good as THC on pain control, but does pretty good. But it doesn't have the high. All right. Now, so it can do a good job. So CBD can do a good job. Now, if you are in a state here in the States or a province in Canada where you have medicinal laws that allow for medicinal marijuana, you want to get your CBD through one of those dispensaries because they're going to get it from the marijuana plant. All right. The things like a Rick Steves CBD oil or the things that you can buy on Amazon actually come from hemp. And they're probably not that strong. They're probably not as effective as if you're getting it from a medicinal marijuana source like we have out here in Washington State. Okay, so just keep that in mind. One of my colleagues, a guy named Uri Murakami up in Canada, he's a physician that lost his license for treating Lyme, does a lot of great advocacy in Canada for Lyme rights and for treating Lyme, has done some petri dish experiments looking at CBD and has found it to be quite useful at killing Lyme, at least on a petri dish, and he's become a big advocate for it. I'm not quite sure if it does a great job of killing. I get mixed results, and again, I'm in a state where we can use it, okay? But I do find it useful for managing symptoms. Now, there's only one problem I see with CBD, and that is even it it can cause memory or thinking issues. Even though it may help with most Lyme symptoms, it often will make your thinking worse. That's the only drawback that I see to using a CBD oil. Okay? All right. Thanks for that question, Nikki. All right, everyone, that is it for me for tonight. It's been about an hour and a half here. I didn't make it the whole hour and a half. That's great. I will be taking off next week because it is obviously the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, so we won't be doing this. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to do these in December or not. I may take off the holiday season. We usually get a lower turnout, but I will let you know in the next day or two if I'm going to do that. But we will definitely be off next week, and I'll let you know tomorrow as to whether I'm going to be doing a January series or not. It just gets to be a little spotty December series. It gets to be a little spotty in terms of attendance as everyone starts focusing in on the holidays, okay? All right, so I've had a good time with you tonight. Tomorrow morning by around 6 or 6:30 in the morning, Pacific Standard Time, Seattle time, you should have an email with a link to the recording to the webinar. The other thing I'm going to do here in a minute is I'm going to, as we close out the webinar, I'm going to take you over to the treatlyme.net site, which is the Treat Lyme book. If you have not subscribed to the Treat Lyme book, I encourage you to do it. When you do it, keep in mind that it supports the work that we're doing here, okay? So I would encourage you to go ahead and do that. I appreciate if you would actually do that, all right? And so that's it. If I don't talk to you until after the holidays, have a great holiday, everyone. But I definitely will see you. But I may see you before Christmas. We'll have to decide about that. All right. Good night, everyone. Thanks for being here.